The case of AIDS. The story of AIDS begins in 1948 when a young intelligence officer recruited Nazi expatriates to serve in influential positions in the United States military, in the biological sciences, and in the aerospace industries. According to Dr. Leonard Horowitz in Deadly Diplomacy, one such officer was Henry Kissinger. 20 years later, Kissinger was serving on the National Security Council and then became President Nixon's closest advisor. While seeking an alternative to nuclear welfare, as early as 1969, Kissinger directed the DoD to request $10 million from Congress to be used to develop a special virus, which was to render the human immune system ineffective when attacked by the synthetic virus. 10 years later, an AIDS and Ebola epidemic erupted in parts of Africa, coincident with CIA covert operations and the inoculation of African natives with a smallpox vaccine. This activity implicates not only Henry Kissinger and Dr. Gallo, but a network of scientists who were working for the world's largest pharmaceutical maker, Merck, Sharp and Dome, which led to the CIA, NATO, and OTRAG, that's OTRAG, a West German Nazi-linked company in Zaire, to Litton Industries, a leading American military contractor, to the genocide of black Africans and American homosexuals. In emerging viruses, AIDS and Ebola, Horowitz suggests these virus diseases were a product of the biological weapons race of the 1960s and 1970s, whether accident or otherwise. Countless immune system ravaging viruses were being experimented with, and an assortment of antidotal vaccines were supposedly being developed for defense and cancer prevention. Such viruses apparently were used in Central Africa by the CIA in response to prefabricated threats of communism, black nationalism, and third world population growth. Horowitz implies that there was a covert use of biological warfare in Africa under the direction of Henry Kissinger, who was an advisor, Frank Carlucci, and Joseph Califano, Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. Presidents Nixon and Ford, and power elites such as Nelson and Lawrence Rockefeller. Horowitz believes the HIV and Ebola viruses may have been intentionally used to stem the population explosion in Central Africa. According to Joan J. McKenna, Director of Research, TBM Associates, Berkeley, California, found a major correlation between a prior history of syphilis and the development of AIDS, independent of sensationalized behavior or blood transfusions, and independent of whether they tested HIV positive, and long-term infections of syphilis while causing immune suppression also foster overgrowth of viruses, odd forms of virus, as well as opportunistic infections. HIV may actually be a marker for an otherwise undetected altered form of syphilis. McKenna suspects it may be the black syphilis of Asian origin. This helps answer the first question, what is the AIDS virus? While I have no intention of presenting a discussion about the biochemical processes involved in the creation of a biotechnological products, it is important to review some of the history of how AIDS virus came into being and the political economic implications associated with its onset. In the early 1970s, when Dr. Robert Gallo was a biological weapons contractor for the CIA's top secret project, MKNA or Maconomy. He was hired to create and evaluate a virus that would destroy the human immune system's ability to resist infection. In 1984, Gallo was the National Cancer Institute when he claimed he had discovered the AIDS virus, which supposedly spontaneously evolved from monkeys through a mutation process. After this, Gallo and Max Essex suggested that the virus and its American Academy for the Advancement of Science, the suspicion that the HIV-1 had originated in the laboratory was discussed. Then in 1992, a Texas researcher proposed a new theory about the origin of the AIDS virus, which essentially implied it was man-made and the developing infections were a result of experimental inoculations of Africans using a polio vaccine. Dr. Robert Bohannon investigated the possibility, and his conclusion suggests that AIDS was a result of human error. On March 25, 1992, McNeil-Lehrer reported nearly 50% of the 210,000 documented AIDS cases in the U.S. were among blacks, Hispanics, Native Americans, or Asians black, forming 31% of the new cases, although being only 12% of the population. This meant blacks and minorities were clearly being infected disproportionately, tongue twister, by AIDS, as were gays, intravenous drug users, and prostitutes. Therefore, the conclusion is, regardless of the cause or origin, AIDS is a genocidal tactic because the non-white populations around the world are being decimated while white Europeans and North Americans are being affected very little.